Okay, great. So some people are joining now. I'm gonna give it about 2 minutes till everyone's able to log in. Oh, they're coming in quick. Great. Welcome, everyone. All right. Thank you all for attending. Oh man, it's really shot up. Okay, great. Just give it 1 more minute and we'll get started. All right, it looks like we've gotten most people that were in the waiting room into this session. So thank you for joining. My name is Heather Harmon. I head up marketing here at Rev1 Inventors. And normally we would be in person at Rev1. We miss all of your beautiful faces, but through the power of technology, we have the opportunity today to bring you 2 amazing speakers from our research institutions that are forming some amazing companies, amazing startups that we're working with, and excited to tell you their stories today, what they're working on, and how you could get involved in a similar mission as to what they're doing. So with that, I'm gonna have some housekeeping items just to start out with. So this webinar is being recorded. You will get a copy of it afterwards. And I would love for you guys to ask questions during this. So we will save time for about 15 minutes of questions at the end, but I also want this to feel more interactive. So down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. Please feel free to use that to ask the questions. Those questions are with us panelists. We'll be able to see them. I will interrupt Wayne and team and ask your questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking them in the Q&A, you can also chat them directly to me, and I will be happy to ask them anonymously. With that, I wanted to pass it off to Wayne Embry. Oh, we're already getting chat. Great, keep them coming. Hello, Sonia. From Israel. Wow, we've got quite a big footprint today, so welcome. Anyway, please feel free to chat your questions and ask throughout, and we'll make sure to call out. So with that, Wayne, I'm passing off to you, and please introduce our illustrious guests today.
Great, Heather, thank you so much. We're really excited to have our 2 guests with us today. This is both Lauren and Heather are wonderful examples of the quality of the academic work that's done in Central Ohio, and the kinds of investigators that we have the privilege to work with at Rev1. So first, I'm going to introduce Lauren Bakelitz, PhD. Lauren's the Tilly Coleman Endowed Chair in Pediatrics and the Vice President for Basic Research and Director of the Center for Microbial Pathogenesis at the Abigail Wexner Research Institute, Nationwide Children's Hospital. And she also holds an appointment in the Department of Pediatrics at Ohio State University. And if I remember correctly, you started at OSU first and then went to NCH, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We moved my lab to the Abigail Wexner Research Institute in NCH about 20 years ago. And it's been an outstanding fit for us in the work that we do.
Great. And also joining us is Heather Allen. Heather is the Dow Professor and Ohio State Distinguished Scholar in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at The Ohio State University. The first question I want to ask both of you is why? Why do you do what you do? And why is it important
Lauren,
to you?
please go first.
You know, I have always been very, very interested in infectious diseases, and particularly those that are chronic and recurrent. And so, you know, I entered this field to really understand the mechanisms by which bacteria and viruses cause disease, and how these invisible enemies can really bring humans to their knees. And trying to use that understanding to develop ways to prevent, ideally, or better treat these diseases. You know, I think when I started, I believed that I would probably, hopefully, contribute to the fund of knowledge. But now we're at a point where I truly believe we're going to be able to translate that into good. And to me, that is the holy grail of science, to be able to say that you've done good by really helping people. And so that motivates me tremendously. When I look at these children who suffer from the diseases that we focused on, or the adults that have these chronic infections, the thought that we're going to actually be able to bring something to them that will be helpful is very inspiring.
So for me, I'd say everything's kind of a journey. It's sort of the next step in doing something new and interesting and having an impact. I started out in academics interested in atmospheric chemistry, and I still have a strong interest in atmospheric chemistry, but yet I ended up doing a lot of tool making and spectroscopy, the study of light and its interaction with matter. And we study a lot of fundamental phenomena in the lab and make some very large scale kinds of instruments to study these things. And then I just was sort of fascinated really by tools and bringing in the right people in the lab. We started going in another direction, and that's where our QCI, which is our technology, kind of was born. And so the reason why, and do you mean the reason why we're now at a startup stage, or the reason why we do the research? Maybe they're combined.
Well, we're going to get to both, but if you're ready to segue, go for it.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I will say a little bit more before I segue into that. So again, for research, I've always been fascinated with fundamental basic science, and we study water surfaces. We study ions and how water molecules solvate or hydrate a liquid surface, and what's the structure of water. I mean, I talk about things as simple as, you know, there's 1 out of 4 water molecules. If you drink a glass of water and you look down at water and it's clean water, not too much other stuff in it, it really is clean water. 1 out of 4 water molecules has a OH, not OHIO, but ROIO, but an OH, an oxygen and a hydrogen, bonded together, that's actually dangling out in the air looking at you. So we study and we look at signatures for something as simple as that. And we get funding through Department of Energy and National Science Foundation for also our work in atmospheric chemistry and looking at ocean surface proxy systems to understand aerosol production and chemistry. And in doing that, we use a lot of different tools. And so a lot of the experiments in our lab are done with what we call nonlinear optics and large laser sources that are ultrafast lasers. And then we develop different aspects of these instruments. And some of them are small and maybe on a table, and others take up, you know, half of the bedroom. But then I've been dealing with some smaller instruments lately to measure electric fields across the interface. And then what the segue to QCI really came about from inviting a visiting scholar that was a PhD student out of South America in my lab that really took us another direction. And that was QCI. So I like learning things that are new all the time. I like impact, obviously, with atmospheric chemistry, and we do also some cancer detection. So a lot of different things, and I'm a little bit in all different directions, and part of my problem is, you know, following it through and focusing our research. Not really a problem, but it's, you know, this is why I go in like 5 different directions. I enjoy the science and where it leads me.
Great. And Lauren, can you talk a little bit about your evolution, transition from basic science to more applied, and just how that happened with you, and kind of your thoughts as you were kind of seeing that evolution happen?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we like to study the molecular mechanisms by which viruses and bacteria work together to cause disease. And in the study of that, in learning how they do this, for example, you get a cold, and a week later you have an ear infection, you have a sinus infection, you have an exacerbation of cystic fibrosis or COPD. In studying those molecular mechanisms, we discovered the ways that bacteria actually adhere and colonize their host, how they live in your airway and maintain that residence there. And in that study, as we unraveled that, we found some targets. They were targets for vaccines. They were targets for therapeutics. And so we started to design and test and redesign and reevaluate and test those candidates. And when they started to show great efficacy in animal models, that is when I decided I really needed to start talking to people about what it takes to take a product to humans, to get a product to market, to really design a vaccine. Bacteria and viruses don't read our books. We have algorithms to help us with that, but I can tell you they can outwit us every step of the way. And I had the great fortune to work with Pravin Kumaya at Ohio State, the protein and peptide chemist, with John Clements at Tulane University, who taught me about adjuvant chemistry, delivery of vaccines, how to get the immune response that you really need to be protective. And along that way, it became clear to us that we needed to start protecting our intellectual property. So I then got to the opportunity to learn about material transfer agreements, patents, office actions, what it takes to really protect that, and then pitch it to industry. Now, for me, in the vaccine field, at least initially, we decided to do a traditional licensing agreement with Big Pharma because it takes tremendous amount of time and effort and infrastructure to do clinical trials. And I'm extremely pleased to say that we now have a candidate in phase 2B trials in about 95 sites all over the world. So please keep your fingers crossed that that will do some good. But other intellectual property we had lent itself more to spinning off a startup company. So in 2017, we launched Untitled Biosciences, which was a partnership between Monon Bioventures and the Abigail Wexner Research Institute. And then this year, in May, we launched Claromatics Biosciences. And that is a whole new technology that targets bacterial biofilms. And it is the appropriate way, we believe, to be translational in our work and really get the science to the people we're trying to help with chronic and recurrent bacterial diseases.
It may seem obvious to some folks and less so to others why you would choose to take either of your innovations and intellectual property down the path of a startup versus an incumbent, an established corporation with all the resources, the marketing engine, the R&D engine, all of those attributes. So both of you talk a little bit about that choice to go the startup route as opposed to going down the licensing route with an established company that you may already know and have worked with in the past.
Heather, do you want to lead this one?
Well, I'm not sure that my technology was far enough along to be licensed by a large established company at this point. And so to really make it, to go to the next step, I felt that we had to do a startup. I mean, that was the path. So as opposed to leaving it behind, and letting Ohio State maybe market it out to a larger company and wait around maybe for a larger company. So I felt that I wanted to continue to develop it, and we're still honing in on what the best market is currently, because we have a lot of different kinds of possibilities, from pharma to gluten and food. And so there's just kind of a real vast array of different possibilities, since I'm a tool maker, in essence, with QCI, if that makes sense.
So on my end, I was actually giving a talk at a meeting and was approached by Big Pharma. And that, I will say, I was very young, very naive, and it ended up being a great experience, I will say that. But it was a learning experience, to be sure. And it's turned out well, but it is a slow process. Unlike COVID-19 vaccines, which are taking about 3 weeks to develop, this vaccine took about more in the 15 to 20 year range, which is more typical. But, along the way, I learned a great deal. And like Heather said, we've got a really rich new pipeline of things right now that are very innovative, very powerful. And I want to be very involved in and help with moving those forward with a team, a management team that really knows what they're doing and can best position that technology I have a platform technology now, which is very different than a single vaccine. And it just really, this seemed to be the best fit because we have an outstanding team, and it's working well. So I like having had both experiences though, because I can tell you that getting a PhD in microbiology prepared me for neither. And so I get to still learn. I have a whole new lexicon of words that I never knew existed, and a true appreciation for the business of science, which, you know, I will admit, I just didn't have coming into this.
So that's another
We're receiving
aspect.
quite a few questions. Oh, go ahead, Wayne.
Oh no, well, I just want to get to this one because I think it ties into some of the questions that are being asked. So, yeah, thanks for, but yeah, just whack me. And so when you both of you have made the choice, at least for now, to remain in the academy while you're also working to spin out or have already spun out some technology. Why is that? And how do you reconcile the two sides of that equation?
I'm awfully new, I think, in this, and so although I've been asked that question, would I be ready to leave the academy if this were to go to the next level? That threw me off when somebody asked me that last year, and I thought, wow, gosh, I have an awful lot of freedom in the academy to investigate different things. And I'm, for example, now I am able to build a team. I have a team of 4, a postdoc, well, actually co-inventor that I'm paying as a postdoc, and then 2 graduate students and an undergrad. And I feel like that gives me the opportunity to kind of explore new avenues before we really hit maybe the home run. And so the academy, I feel right now, because I don't know the SBIR world yet well enough to know that I could do it in the same way. So the answer is maybe I'd be ready to move from the academy into that world. I'm not sure I'm at that crossroad yet.
And I think for me, the academic part of me feeds the entrepreneurial side of me. You know, most of the ideas I've had that have been good have been widely unpopular. They have been the ones that, and each and every time somebody said that can't be true, that isn't true, that will never work. And so I think that process of just discovery and teaching the next generation of students really kind of keeps me in the academic quadrant. It allows me to really follow up on some of these ideas that are dogma bashing. I mean, they are not intentionally, they just have ended up being that way. But once something I know is good, it's sure, it's been tested, that's when I move it to the other side of my house. So by keeping my feet on both sides of the house, I feel like I can leverage those opportunities to the best advantage that we can have in getting our technology to people.
Let me speak to that a little bit more, Wayne, too.
Sure.
Just by saying, I think with me, with our work, the QCI is not really fundable in the way that I normally get funding. I study basic science, so it really is quite a big departure for me to do a startup compared to getting money for basic science from Department of Energy and National Science Foundation. So I'm not really used to that world. And in fact, I would say, I remember this last 15 years when people were talking about startups and trying to motivate Ohio State faculty to do more in intellectual property. You know, I'm a chemist and I'm a physical analytical chemist, and so I don't make molecules, I study molecules. And I always thought during this time, this is not about me, this is about the engineers, this is about the biochemists, the people that do this as part of their normal research. And so what's very different for me is I don't come from that even thinking, and this is really, I never would have predicted that I would be doing this now, even maybe 6 years ago. So it really is a very big departure in a sense, even though my expertise overlaps and lines well, I did not have the insight more than 5 years ago that this would be the case.
So you've both talked about the journey you've taken from basic science to more applied, and the issues that you've had to learn regarding material transfer agreements and intellectual property and IP protection. And that whole process. So one of the questions we've gotten is, do you think the intellectual property process as we currently have it, is it a barrier to the production of drugs, of solutions, of better products, at least in the U.S. and potentially globally. So is the patent system actually working against us as opposed to enabling, cures and new products getting into the market?
In my world, I've had the arguments of both ways that maybe you shouldn't even patent it because then more of the information is out there. And so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm on the fence.
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I certainly, when you're thinking about licensing, if you don't have patents, no one's going to talk to you. I mean, whether that's right or wrong or how you feel about that, you really need that protection for your intellectual property, because pharma, for example, is investing billions of dollars usually in the development of products to get them to market, and they want to make sure that they get a return on that investment. But at the same time, there have been times back when people were blasting genomes and sequencing every open reading frame, and then you couldn't do anything with those gene products, even if you wanted to. I think sometimes the changes in the law will catch up with the problems that are created by the system. So I agree. I don't know that it's a very black and white issue for me. I certainly am very invested in patenting. I've learned I have to be to get what I need, which is to improve the health of people. So I am in a system where that is still something that's a very important part of the process. So what I had to do was learn about it. I had to learn how to work in that system and how to make things work to best our advantage. And that was a whole new area of learning for me, I will say.
I'll echo that. The language of the attorney is so much different than the language of the academic.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the source of funding for a lot of your work over your careers, coming from, in many cases, federal sources or other grant organizations, talk a little bit about the philosophy associated with then commercializing that work, and how that squares with the mission and the purpose of the funding source.
You want me to go?
Sure.
I'll go first. Okay. So Department of Energy and National Science Foundation are more so ever increasingly wanting you to have intellectual property. And they usually have you write up certain, proposal, and also in your annual reports, something about that, and they look highly upon that. But, they're not funding that beyond the conception or the conceptual stage, the beginning funding, at least within the grants that I have. Yeah,
so the NIH is, through BIDOL, they don't really impede the intellectual property process. They want the rights to, if you develop a product that could be useful to the government, vaccine for troops or whatever, they do have those rights. So they don't really impede that. But you do have to be very active in that space. If you want to protect your intellectual property, there is a definite role for you to steward that through the process, and you need to stay actively involved. When you are partnered with a commercial entity, it's different. We've always operated under what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine. What we do together is shared, and really trying to make sure that partnership is honored in that way. The two parties come together because both bring something to the table, something very important to the table. And under the best circumstances, they continue to develop things together that suits their needs. And I have to say, I might have a very specific path that's funded by the NIH, where I'm trying to contribute to the general fund of knowledge. When I'm trying to serve a commercial entity, the bottom line is finances often, is faster. The motto of fail early, fail fast is the antithesis of the academic approach, but the guiding principle often of a commercial entity. And to learn and appreciate both sides of the house and the needs of both of those has been a huge evolution of my career. So, I do very much try to keep things very separate in that way. The basic scientists in my group working on that. I don't put students on commercial interests because I don't want them to not be able to present. So I'm very careful about my trainees stay on the NIH side of the house. My other more experienced modelers, animal modelers, vaccine developers, therapeutic developers might come back and forth between them. But just really realizing the benefits and stresses of both of those sides, it took me a while. it took me a while to figure that out. I will say, I think I've got it now, which is good to know.
You are both, accomplished senior scientists and women. Can you talk a little bit about, how you see opportunities in the academy, in science, both in the academy, but also in commercial, for not only your contemporaries, but also those coming up behind you, and how would you, looking at when you started versus now, what kind of advice would you give people? What kind of things are you still aware of that we need to do better as a society, as organizations? I know it's a multifaceted question, but all those things are sort of intertangled.
Yeah. So I can lead on this one. If I had to boil it down to one thing, and I give a lot of thought to this, is that when I was coming up through the system, I didn't really have many role models. I didn't have a lot of mentors that were really someone I would look at and say, that's who I want to be, and that's that I want to do, because I needed a mentor who modeled the role of being a successful scientist and academic, but also someone who wanted a family. And for me, that was something that I believe in very strongly now, is mentorship. And I say to all the women I mentor, find a mentor, talk to that mentor and ask them to help you. And I just don't mean in writing papers, selecting classes, academics. I mean in every part of the development of your life, where you have a trusted person you can go to, and they will keep your confidences, but they will not tell you what you want to hear. They will tell you what you need to hear. And they will not let you make the mistakes they made. You can make your own new ones. And the only thing I ask in return is that those people, when they're ready, that they reach down and they mentor someone below them, because I do think it's a very important part of where we've seen some bottlenecks in terms of women moving through the ranks to the upper ranks in academia. They crave mentorship, and I think that's a very important part, if I had to boil it down to one thing.
This is a difficult question, because there's really vast differences between institutions sometimes, and between departments of equity. And for example, at Ohio State in the Department of Chemistry, where basically I grew assistant to associate to full and so on, it has really grown. I mean, we're more than 30, I think we're about 25% probably women now in this department. And that just, we're pretty much high for the departments across the country. And during these 20 years, I've seen an evolution of just the dynamics. And, I never really felt a problem being a woman, but I can say as more women have come in, I've had more fellowships with other women, and it's easier to sometimes speak and become a friend, and be at a different level with the same sex, because there's just a different dynamic there. And there's something to be said about this. I think it's a 33% rule about, gender. You come in, and then there's a different environment. It's a more inviting environment. And so I've seen that evolve at Ohio State to a very good place in our department. But I can tell you, I just wrote a letter for a review letter for someone for tenure who I followed at another university, who I won't say, in a fairly close by location, not in Ohio, but who's had tremendous difficulties in her department. Same kind of chemistry department. And a lot of it comes from not only, I think, the gender gap a bit, but also what goes along with that and why, there's some of those implicit things that go along with it. But a lot of it came from also that in these fundamental or basic science departments now, in the last 10 years or more, they've been hiring multidisciplinary people they want to have collaborations, but yet still the departments themselves, they still don't know how to structure themselves and evaluate that person when they're very collaborative. Because you have to imagine, as a professor, we are evaluated on, we have to show that we can basically build our own company almost, in a sense, in an academic sense. But if you have a lot of collaborations and you're collaborating with other senior scientists and they're on your papers, then it becomes difficult to piece out who's doing what work and who's the lead and who's the not. And so getting tenure in some of these places it's kind of a mixed bag when you have both a gender issue, maybe there's not sort of an old boys network still in some places, not all at all. Overall I feel it's pretty good, but there are still some places that are pretty good departments that don't quite get it yet. And I feel like there's some people suffering from that. And I can tell you, again, this is just recent, but I've just been astonished at some of the things that I've been mentoring this person through, and mentoring not closely, but I met her at a National Science Foundation panel, and we started talking a few years ago, and I'm like, this is not normal. This is not, what you're going through is not right. From things about not getting your laboratory up and running, and then not getting extra time on the tenure clock, things of this sort, that, and even male colleagues, at the same time, it's not just always female, male colleagues too. I mean, there's some things about the younger generation coming in that we have to mentor. And then there's also gender on top. I don't know if I went off topic, but.
No, if I could just add to that, those are great points, Heather, is that until recently, for promotion and tenure, if you had a patent, invention disclosure, started a company, it didn't count. I mean, you had to have papers and abstract. And, when I recently heard a promotion and tenure committee member say, well, how much work is it really to start a company?
No, this is very true. They want you to do this, but yet you're not given credit. And this is still true, even in good departments.
So that is something that's having to change. And those discussions are ongoing, because that's just, scientists now are much more entrepreneurial. And we have to recognize that and value that and reward that, because that is as important as the basic science side of the house, I think.
I think there's mixed messages too, right? We're more entrepreneurial because we've kind of been pushed that way a little bit too, and been, people talk about it and like, oh, okay, we can do this, but then it's that double-edged sword again. Is it really credited? No, not really yet.
Well, there's one of the things that I'm not sure that some of the folks in our audience fully comprehend. I mean, we see these large dollars associated with the federal R&D budgets, but could you talk to, over your careers, what you've seen with respect to the decline in the allocation of those dollars to certain areas, and the decreasing number of grants and programs that are receiving funding? Because I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of academics have had to become more entrepreneurial. They've had to go find money in places that they traditionally didn't think they would have to work to get funding.
Yeah, I think back in the day when the NIH funding pay lines were much more generous, and I wouldn't ever say it was easy to get a grant, but it was easier than it certainly is today. You could probably rely on getting 1 or 2 R01 grants to sustain your program and your research, but as that funding dropped, as it became harder and harder with each administration, as there were set-asides for the disease of the month or the disease of the moment, and the budgets were small, people did have to learn to diversify their funding sources, went to private foundations, and sometimes to pharma, sometimes through these commercial ventures. And so, and as Heather said, there's a push for that now. People, Ohio State and others you've seen there to be a push more to that entrepreneurial side, but not everybody knows how to do that. So I think people are redefining themselves and relearning how to fund their programs. They're very multidisciplinary now, because that helps you move forward. But again, it's hard to credit. What was your role? What was your part? If you're not the primary author or the senior author on a paper, a co-author, if you're a multi-PI, how do we credit that? So there's a lot of transition going on right now as we define what is success in academia.
So again, in a chemistry department or biochemistry, as opposed to engineering, I think it's a little bit different. We are certainly not trained to go after funding through non-federal kinds of agencies, or maybe in the NIH, like an Alzheimer's or a Heart Association within biochemistry, yes. But on my side of the world in studying phenomena, it's not typical. And so Department of Energy, Basic Energy Sciences, and National Science Foundation really are kind of the core of, and I maybe had one NIHR 21 for something more applied, but those are really the core. Some people are able to go maybe get some money through Procter & Gamble and some of these different places, but I'm not sure the motivation for me or for other people is necessarily to do a startup to diversify the funding. If anything, it feels like an activation energy barrier to learn that new world, and it really has to be a inner want to explore those avenues, because to me it's not an easy target to figure out how to fund. I'm still not there, and so I'm still funding from piecing together from a retention package that I got 5 years ago. So I'm not sure that's.
I don't think people are thinking of starting a startup as a way to fund their research, but oftentimes on entrepreneurial sides, you can get co-development deals, or you can get funding through sponsored research agreements. And that is part of maybe first rights of refusal to then start a company, go into a licensing deal. And in that case, that's what sometimes has made these attractive endeavors to consider, because, otherwise people just go belly up if they have to close their labs because they don't have funding.
Recently, a pretty well-known VC made the comment that every company is now a infectious disease company, result of COVID and the issues that we're dealing with. Could you talk a little bit about what you think, some of the biggest problems, or the biggest opportunities we may be facing in the life sciences, whether they directly relate to viruses or not, but what are some of the biggest problems, biggest opportunities you think that we have in front of us right now?
So I'm taking that's to me.
So I can actually comment on that too later, though.
Okay, good, perfect. So first of all, pandemics are horrible, but if nothing else, they've certainly educated people as to the power of microbes. That we need to respect and understand that these invisible entities can really globally bring us down. And they're very, very clever. They're very adaptive. And so we have a tremendous problem right now with antibiotic resistance, and we have a tremendous problem with chronic and recurrent diseases. We now have the advanced understanding that we need to do something about both of those situations, and the ability to really study these microbes in a way that helps us gain better control of them. You've seen that in the fast tracking forward for the COVID-19 vaccines that are undergoing, because they have to be. It's not necessarily a normal approach, but it has to be. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to leverage this new appreciation globally of why we need to think about infectious diseases, why we need to think about antibiotic resistance, why we need to be ahead of this rather than reactive to it. We need to be proactive. And I think that's an opportunity that people in the ID space can and should take advantage of.
So I think a global problem, and I'm sure many people share this, is the problem of raw materials and medications and our supply line coming from China and contaminants. And this is one of the actually opportunities that we're possibly looking at with QCI detection. So it's just amazing how many raw materials come from China, and the contaminants that might be in one facility, how widespread they become in different medications and different drugs that are then deployed or then distributed to big pharma in the United States and then go out there for the general public use. And there's been several things that have been identified. I think it's this fiasco of a few years ago, the dimethyl nitrosamine that that I just learned about actually somewhat recently from a colleague. But clearly there's quality control issues that we as a country and industry and big pharma does not have a good handle on right now. So a big threat to health.
Do both of you have kind of a dream product that you'd like to see in the market? Something that either currently doesn't exist, that you'd like to see somebody come up with, or that you would like to develop and bring to the market?
I'd like 20 different prototypes of my product to be able to attack all the different things of detection and contaminants. And that's really my dream.
At risk of sounding very self-serving, I've never been more excited about the technology I've developed than the one I have right now. This platform technology, the power of it, the ability for it to do good. I absolutely want to see this come to market because I absolutely am convinced it's going to be transformational in how we think about chronic and recurrent diseases. So yes, I have a dream and I'm living it right now, trying to move this forward. And I'm super excited about the opportunity.
Well, I'd actually like both of you to talk just a little bit more specifically about, each of your technologies and use an example. So, Heather, use a very specific, you've alluded to it, but, just describe, a little more succinctly and around a particular application and the form factor for your technology. And then Lauren, I'd like you to do the same thing.
Sure.
So maybe if I could just follow through the raw materials and imagine, so we have a handheld, low-cost instrument that uses a machine learning or learning platform. So it's very different than what's out there for detection, and it's not a large, expensive analytical lab. So imagine pharmaceutical or even a smaller pharmacy in another country wants to analyze an incoming product, and it could be something as simple as Tylenol. And is there that contaminant in those pills or in those drugs? And one doesn't have to then send it out to a lab. One can just quickly analyze it and say yes, no, and so then we know it's safe. And so this could be an incoming raw material for that product into Pfizer or whatever company it is, or it could be a pharmacy in Africa.
So from my end, we're really at an interesting part of history where we have a tremendous global problem with chronic and recurrent bacterial diseases. They are extremely resistant to our immune system. They're resistant to antibiotics for one primary reason, and that's because these bacteria make biofilms. These biofilms are three-dimensional fortresses that protect these bacteria from our antibodies, from our antibiotics, from everything. And they're very, very hardy and recalcitrant. So you think about cystic fibrosis, otitis media, COPD, burn wounds, pneumonia, chronic infections, many of us chronic rhinosinusitis. These are biofilm diseases. So what our technology does is it targets a structural element of that fortress and collapses it. When that happens, those bacteria get released and we can kill them. We can kill them easily with our immune systems, with antibiotics. They're extremely sensitive. Our technology is not an antibiotic. That has a very negative connotation. We are not an antibiotic company. It is not limited to a single disease or a single organism. We have a decade worth of publications to show that this works in vitro and in vivo in multiple animal models. And we now have a lead therapeutic, a lead vaccine candidate, and we believe that this is going to be very, very transformational and have a tremendous impact on how we consider these diseases that have been largely considered untreatable because of these biofilms. We throw antibiotics at them, they quiet, and they come back. So right now there's 500,000 deaths in the United States alone each year due to biofilm diseases. And these are tremendously expensive, in the billions and billions of dollars. So at least 25 billion for chronic wounds, about 14 billion for periodontitis, another 5 billion for otitis media, 1 billion for cystitis, and the list goes on and on and on. The problem is antibiotics can't get to bacteria in a biofilm. So what we're doing is we're destroying that fortress. And when we destroy it, those bacteria can be killed. And I think that is the power of this technique. And we're very excited about the potential, particularly now that we have these leads. So we're going to try to get them into the clinic as soon as possible and see how they do. They've done very well preclinically. We still have work to do, but they're doing well so far.
So maybe piggyback on that a little bit and let me just talk about kind of a different application too, and thinking about another application of heparin. And there's been certainly problems with basically oversulfated chondroitin sulfate being contaminated in heparin. And heparin is a blood thinner, is used in the hospital, and it's basically deadly when it is contaminated with this. And again, the source comes from China. And so imagine a point of source maybe before it actually is hooked up in the IV to the patient being tested. as well as, prior to production.
That's great. So we had a question regarding the regulatory process in the U.S. versus the rest of the world. Given probably more Lauren's experience, having seen the regulatory process, with your some of your prior inventions, do you think it makes sense to go to market first in another country with a less stringent regulatory framework, which would result potentially in a lower cost of taking a drug to market?
So I'm going to have a mixed response to that. There certainly regulations are important, and the due diligence that's associated with putting anything in a human, particularly a human baby, which is where I've worked a lot of my career, are important, and I'm absolutely engaged in that and honor those restrictions. But sometimes it is a lot easier to do the type of work that went into the approval for the vaccine that I was involved in developing, because you need people to test that in. And we're a developed country. We have very immunized population as a whole. And in order to do the large scale trials that you need, where you might need an immunologically naive person to get the best clinical trial, the infrastructure that Big Pharma had, in my case, to be able to conduct those trials very carefully, very thoughtfully, very controlled, in a population where they were able to find many, many subjects to test, did move it quicker. It absolutely moved it quicker. Now, they can move quicker in other countries, sometimes because of that, but ultimately, this is the market that these companies also want. So they're still going to have to go through our regulatory system, the FDA, and all of those hoops they'll have to jump through. But certainly moving through the phases of trial to get the data you need to get those approvals can move much quicker. And in fact, the pharmaceutical company I work with, they routinely, that is their MO, to develop in Central America or Europe and then move to the United States because of that, because speed is important in this world. It's important in the world that they live in. And so that has been the experience I've seen, and I've seen the benefits of that, I will have to say. And even though I hope that we also get to move that back to the United States, back home, would be great.
Yeah. So you both talked very eloquently about mentoring and working with the women coming up in both the academy, but also on the commercialization side of the equation. If one of the individuals you were mentoring came to you and said, I want to commercialize my technology, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Stick with it. I would say that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Be prepared for that. It will have its ups and downs, but stick with it, because when you get to the other side, it can be tremendously rewarding. And you have to stay engaged. You have to stay as the steward of your invention, your techniques. You can't just pass it off to someone and then just move on to something else. It is like having a baby. You will have to take care of this for a long time, and that's fine. You just need to understand that it is going to take your involvement, your active involvement and care to be successful.
Yeah, I can't say that any better. I would say that you have to recognize it is going to take a certain number of hours commitment and your intellect and your attention, and you can't shortchange that. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Then you've just wasted basically everyone else's time and yours.
Go ahead.
So there is, I've had one of my younger colleagues is got an invention and she's moving forward on it, and I'm not that much further ahead, maybe a year ahead, and I'm not as far as Lauren is in this process. But I certainly, it's very exciting, but then that excitement wears off, and you realize, well, you're still excited about your technology, but it's in a different arena, and you just, it takes work, and you have to be excited to want to take on that work. But just recognize, like she said, I think the marathon, it is the long haul, and it's not a short sprint. But you can
So
do it. You can do it, and you can balance academics with this.
Yeah.
In fact, Ohio State allows 8 hours. You know, they don't really keep track of that 8 hours anyways. 8 hours a week, I think, is what it is. You know, the time spent on that, you still have to do everything else that you had to do before anyways. But this is the way we roll all the time anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, so I'd say it's a journey again, and I think not doing it, if you have the opportunity, is a lost opportunity.
And so do you believe there's an opportunity, a need for a more formalized approach to training faculty, students in entrepreneurship?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, Children's started doing that several years ago because we recognized that, just like me, you know, half of us had no idea how to protect our intellectual property. We might know about a material transfer agreement. We certainly heard about patents, but I'll tell you, there's still people that say, oh my gosh, you have hundreds of patents, you must be rich. And I just want to laugh. I said, oh, well, you know, not really. That's not exactly what happens. It's a way to protect your IP, but then you have to develop behind it. But, you know, I learned, someone told me very early to read those documents, learn what they mean, learn that language, understand that. That's a very important part of what we do too, to understand what you're signing away, what you have to do to keep confidential, what you can freely talk about. All of that is a very important part of the process, and training people to do that. You know, I tell people, when you're on a go-see with a potential partner, you're working the whole time. Don't let your guard down when you're at dinner and have had a few drinks and just start, you know, telling people everything that you know, because you have to be a little bit guarded at first, and be very careful about picking your partners wisely. Picking your partners wisely is probably the best and most important advice I can give.
Yeah, definitely. So we were talking a little bit about mentoring as well, and students, I think, was the question, if you could remind me, Wayne.
Well, this is, you know, if, you know, should there, you know, be a formal, you know, education process inside the academy itself to teach PIs, grad students, about entrepreneurship, about the journey?
There has been some maybe official, unofficial. Mary Uhas out of Ohio State has been doing some things, and now I just haven't had the time to be involved in them lately, but maybe 10 years ago, I think I did a couple training sessions and kind of exposed myself. But actually 10, 12 years ago, I tried doing an invention disclosure and a patent, and the technology commercialization office at Ohio State was just not very good at that time. And basically they had me running after other patents and basically just didn't want to patent anything. And so I think it's just really evolved. And so now it's much more supportive. At least it was for me, from my technology 12 years ago. So maybe Lauren had a different experience, but for me, it was definitely not even, it was an anti-commercialization proposition. So now in the last 5 years, it has really changed a lot. And it's much more supportive and leading the way. So I find that they are very helpful, and that really matters a lot more. So it's not just the mentoring part of it. You also have to have that support structure in order to balance everything. And to speak to student mentoring, I agree. I'd like to see beyond in engineering departments, where I think it's more common, in the basic science departments, to have more commercialization discussions and that. So I'm finding it really, really great for my students now. Even though this is not their PhD project, I have them on 2 parallel projects. One is this tech commercialization in their first year or 2, where they're sort of helping, and then parallel is their PhD project, but they're complementary. And they are learning so many different things than my students were before them. And just even in our group meetings, having these discussions and having the other students that only do the basic science being exposed to these discussions. And even I have an undergraduate in computer science that's part of the team for QCI. Just even having the discussions, because I'm involved with it, and now they're involved with it, enriches the students. So I think the enrichment of education goes far beyond what you would think when you have an academic startup in general. And plus, I'm involved in another startup I didn't mention for cancer detection. I'm a co-inventor, but it's licensed, and I'm just a consultant for some equity on that. And again, just having those discussions and really enriches everybody around them in the educational process. So there's really not a downside to that, I don't see.
All right, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. Go ahead.
Well,
Wayne.
I was going to put in, a plug for the strategic partnership that Rev1 has with the Advance office at OSU, and Mary Uhas, who leads that office. About a decade ago, Mary created a program called Reach for Commercialization, which was designed to introduce the commercialization process, mechanism, and issues to women PIs. And we've had the pleasure of partnering with Mary and her team for the last 4 years in that program. And it has been exciting because it has moved the needle. So there's roughly 20 to 25 individuals that participate in that program every year now. And to see the difference between the IP filings before and after is really gratifying. So it's one of the most rewarding things that we get to do at Rev1, and she's now expanded it. We've had several PIs from NCH participate in Reach, as well as I think 2 from AFRL. So it's becoming much more of a regional program as opposed to just focused on opportunities at OSU. So, Heather Harmon, back to you.
I appreciate that plug. Working with Mary is inspiring. So with that, I did want to wrap up our day. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Lauren and Heather and Wayne, for your time today. We really appreciate all the questions that we received from all of our participants. I think we ended up with about 11 or so questions. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And as I said at the beginning, this was recorded. We will send out a recording to everyone, so you'll be able to see that. And check your email inbox for another event like this one in September. So we'll look forward to inviting you back to join us then. And one more thank you to Lauren and Heather
You're welcome.
for the time taken today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Heather. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.